Can AI ever truly be unbiased?
First of all, I think we need to start with the fact that AI is modeled after the human brain, right? The first neuron, the artificial neuron, devised in 1943, and of course then that being transformed into neural networks, which then form what we call deep learning now. So in many ways, we should not expect it to be any less biased than humans. Welcome to T-Talks. My name is Matthias Holweg. I'm the American Standard Companies Professor of Operations Management here at Said Business School, and I'm the Director of the Oxford Artificial Intelligence Program and the AI Ethics Regulation and Compliance Program. And I'm here joined by my colleague Uthman.
Happy to be here. My name is Uthman. I'm a Global Responsible AI Officer and Associate Fellow at the Business School on AI Governance.
So the topic today is, can AI be safe? Shall we maybe begin by talking about sort of the different terms that surround safety? Because, of course, we've seen a lot of news, Jeff Hinton and Joshua Bengio all out there warning of existential threats. So maybe before we go into what actually causes AI to be dangerous, let's talk about the different terminology. How would you distinguish sort of between AI safety, responsible AI, AI ethics, AI governance? How do they all fit?
It's interesting because when I started doing this work, initially it was ethical AI, then that evolved to responsible AI, then AI governance, now AI safety. But there are actually different components to what actually forms the cohesive structure of responsible AI. So ethics is more about principles, norms, societal values. Safety is about security, but also avoiding the actual harm that is caused by misuse of AI. Then governance is the actual policies, procedures, standards to how do you actually implement responsible AI practices, and responsible AI is what brings all of these terms together.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of phrasing it, right? Ethics is AI shouldn't do any harm, right? It should adhere to social norms and values. Governance is how to get there, and safety is just merely the prevention of harm. In my mind, it's a subset, right? It's almost like a given. But there's so much more that AI systems, as they become more powerful, need to adhere to. Well, I mean, we've obviously seen a big regulatory change in the US, and do we still need AI governance? What do you think?
I think AI governance is essential, not only just for risk mitigation, but for commercial success. Because if you're in a large corporation and you want to demonstrate ROI on your AI use cases, you can't credibly do that without strong governance in place, because how else would you even know how you're using AI or if it's actually returning material benefits? And it just makes good business sense for companies to be doing this, because even if you take out the responsible AI banner, if I'm producing, for example, an AI chatbot that constantly spews misinformation or inaccurate outputs, particularly in high-risk settings like healthcare, like think of an AI chatbot used for diagnostics, for example, that's just a bad product. Forget the ethical, legal, reputational risks. It's not actually doing what it was designed to do. And by design, responsible AI should mean that this is actually fit for purpose. So even forgetting about AI governance as a term, these processes and standards should already be there in place.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget, right? I mean, AI systems becoming more powerful on the back of having access to more data and making bigger decisions about our lives. And therefore, in my mind, the core aspect of it is trust, right? And if a company cannot demonstrate to me that my data is handled appropriately, only used for the purpose I've given consent for, and that the models aren't tested to a standard that I find acceptable, I will not trust it. Therefore, I will not adopt it. And therefore, ultimately, it is indeed, as you say, right, good business acumen to develop good and solid AI governance procedures. And I think that's, in my mind, a common misnomer, is that the AI innovation and regulation chasm, which in my mind just makes no sense whatsoever, right? Because going there fast and failing and doing harm is the alternative to testing AI systems properly, governing them properly, and then building trust. But of course, that's currently where we are, right? It's an arms race, and that's where people are going. But of course, you've done AI governance implementation in practice. So, maybe tell us what were sort of the key lessons that you've taken away from doing this in a multinational company?
So when you're doing this at a global operation, you need to be thinking about use case governance, but also corporate governance. So often teams starting in responsible AI governance will start on specific use cases such as implementation of AI assistants like copilots. And this is great because you can develop early guidance for what good looks like for within the company, within teams, and you can also do it persona-based. So for data scientists, they might need to know what evaluation metrics to test for, what accuracy rates, or what metrics are actually for fairness are needed when making predictions about people for specific use cases. Then for legal and compliance teams, they know what they should be vetting in terms of what are the procedural requirements. But on the use case level, this is great at the beginning, but this can only take you so far because you need a comprehensive AI governance framework across all departments, because you need security input, your legal compliance teams, your chief data officer, an ethics specialist, if you're lucky enough to have one, all needs to have input over how you are governing AI. Because even when you say the word governance to different teams, they'll be thinking of different things. If you say AI governance to a commercial head of AI, he or she will be thinking, are we overspending? How many platforms have we approved? Are we delivering value? If you say it to a security professional, they'll be thinking solely about risks. So that even that term governance needs to be defined with each stakeholder having meaningful input. And when you have that corporate governance framework, the most important thing is actually understanding how is AI being used at your company? How are projects even being funded from procure to in-house build? And only when you start doing this, you can actually start mapping out what is our risk tolerance threshold. And the innovation versus regulation dilemma, it comes to a head actually in AI governance, because you often have siloed AI teams not speaking to legal, compliance, or ethics departments that want to do a lot of stuff that could potentially be high risk. Now, because they haven't been speaking to these legal departments, they end up with backlogs for approvals because they want to do 15 things and the legal team says you didn't inform us, now we have to do all these retroactive reviews. Whereas if there was that conversation and that strategy at the beginning to negotiate and at least say, look, we're going to do like 7 high risk ones this year that we define as high risk, but we'll only do them as proof of concept experiments, we'll track the learnings before large scale deployments. This is the resourcing that we need from legal to oversee this. All of a sudden, you're in a much better position to scale successfully.
Yeah, I think it's good that you mentioned sort of the different actors involved, right? I mean, it's very cross-functional. You've got the data scientists developing, or in some cases also procuring AI systems. You've got the legal team worrying about the risks, and of course, you've got the management worrying about the economic benefit of it. And I guess sort of the worst possible scenario we've observed in our research is where the infighting starts, where the roles and responsibilities aren't clear. Who owns it? Is it owned by data science? Is it owned by legal? Is it owned by compliance? And that really becomes a very unproductive setup. And very often we observe in such setups one of two problems. The first one is AI systems that get submitted as an idea, as you say, end up in the backlog and take too long to get approved. So you then lose the opportunity of actually using that AI system productively, or you don't have a good governance process in place, and then a bad system doesn't get assessed properly, gets launched, and of course then you have the fallout in terms of reputational liability or regulatory penalties that might come as a result of having launched something that shouldn't have been launched. So very often, I mean, when I get asked, I always say, look, if we think about AI governance, it's not a nice to have, but it's a technology that's powerful, needs to be governed like any other technology. But think of it as an extension of your current risk management framework, because you might find the same, right? I mean, the closer you line it to existing processes, the easier it becomes to implement, at least in my mind.
Yeah, instead of setting up AI governance as a standalone initiative, that might work in the short term for a few use cases. Eventually, it needs to be embedded within the way the company manages risk at an enterprise level. And to your point about the infighting and roles and responsibilities, this will even be amplified with the EU AI Act and specific sector-specific regulation. For example, if I'm working in HR and I want to use a lot of AI tools, naturally a lot of what I do will fall into the high risk bucket. And for my business unit, I'll know I'll have to go through more legal approvals and scrutiny, risk mitigation than other business units. But unless you have a comprehensive strategy, you won't address this from the top down, because the solution might be that for this specific business unit, they'll be assigned more regulatory expertise. They can hire their own internal AI ethics person. They can have a parallel process that's slightly adjacent to the central process, but that can be managed. But that only comes down you only really develop this blueprint or this plan for which business units need more help when you actually have a top-down strategy.
Yeah, and that is a very good point, right? I mean, AI regulation is essentially, or the level of regulation is a function of the risk an AI system poses, right? That applies to all regulatory efforts across the globe. And therefore, by default, it's mostly those that deal with personal data, HR, education, healthcare, finance, right? That receive a lot of scrutiny. Whereas probably about 80% of all AI systems, like your customer service chatbot, will have very light regulatory requirements, such as only demonstrating to people that use them that you're interacting with an AI, right? So that's the Article 13 obligation of transparency, right? This is an AI chatbot, so you don't, or you can vet as a customer, right, what you're seeing. But actually, of course, regulation only applies to a small function, a small proportion, and only to specific functions. Before we get to the questions, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what does good look like, and what good practices would you recommend to someone who's embarking on the journey of implementing AI governance?
I would say for good practices, what does good look like? You want a slick process where high-risk projects and use cases are identified and risks are mitigated. But the key is not to say just no, that we're not doing them. The way the team or anyone working in AI governance should position themselves is an enabling gatekeeper. So things like we mentioned AI and HR, like CV screening tools, these are inherently higher risk because of the fundamental rights violation that could happen. But if you take the time as a company to upskill your workforce to manage this risk and actually run through these use cases as like practice runs, even smaller proof of concepts, all of a sudden that risk becomes a lot easier to mitigate because you've actually done this before as a company, right? So in terms of good practices, you have things like impact assessments, which are great to even at least map out what requirements the teams have to meet, what are you assessing for, what are you assessing against, identification of high risk as well, learning and development as well, and that can go with learning modules and course content, but also even quick guides for people to know the do's and don'ts of responsible AI at the company. For example, don't use AI in any of these ways that can violate the law, such as the prohibited AI categories within the EU, and you can even take that as your global standard afterwards. And the final one is when you're looking at embedding within risk management frameworks, is to look to proven techniques and methodologies like 3 lines of defense model for corporate governance, where you essentially don't have people marking their own homework. There are ways to do peer review and peer assessments. So at least there's more credibility in how you're assessing AI use cases.
Yeah, I would add to that the learning and development, I think, is probably bigger than you make it there, right? Because as much as people now use Copilot and ChatGPT to do their everyday work, as little as they often know, right? I mean, this is it's really almost dangerous, right? So I think you should only allow people to engage with these tools once they've clearly understood what the set of prohibited practices are, and you should justify them, right? You cannot do this because, let's say your law firm, you cannot upload privileged data to a chatbot, right? Unless it is, sitting in such a ring-fenced private space. But basically explain to people what they can't do. And for that, I think they do need to understand the mechanics of it. And, hallucination is always mentioned as a problem. Of course, it's not a problem. But these large language models just have this feature that they do next word prediction. Therefore, they're stochastic in output that they provide. And therefore, they will hallucinate. That's what makes them write your email, right? So we shouldn't make their function or stuff. It's a feature. It's not a bug, right? But again, people need to understand how they work in order to use them.
And I think you hit one of the most important points about responsible AI is that my concern is people are sort of pigeonholing this as just a solely legal and compliance issue with actually missing the bigger picture. This is actually about change management and cultural change across the organization, because you want everyone at your company to be able to use AI safely and know how to use it properly. And in order to do that, you have to educate an entire workforce and even to know which persons to go through, who to speak to. That takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to not just set up, because setting stuff up is actually the easy part. It's communicating that across the entire organization. That's one that takes a longer time to actually to embed at scale.
Yeah, and there's a huge uphill battle, right, to upskill people fast enough in relation to a technology that's moving very, very fast. We've got questions from the audience. So do you want to pick the first one? I'm curious to see what we've been given.
So the first one is, how can businesses strike a balance between innovation and control when deploying AI at scale in operational environments?
Yeah, I think we said it before, right? I think it's a false dichotomy to say there is a regulation and innovation. But the point is to say not to kill ideas with overdue and not fit for purpose processes for approval. The one specific one in relation to innovation I like a lot are regulatory sandboxes, where you provide specific safe environments where experimentation can happen and where the sort of regulatory demands that were this model to reach production would apply, but they do not yet because it's still in the sandbox. So I think the sandbox is a good way around it. Equally, I think the onus is on the company to provide an efficient approval process and to provide proper guidance why this particular innovation may or may not be one that the company wishes to pursue. I think it could be super frustrating if you're a keen AI engineer, you submit 10 good ideas that all would work, and they would be feasible, only to be knocked back, not by someone looking at it who knows what they're saying, but by someone looking at it who doesn't know what they do, and therefore, drawing this out to months or years. And that's, of course, super counterproductive. But what do you think?
And to your point as well, I think that, again, people sort of misunderstand what responsible AI is when they view it solely as the lens of just saying no and compliance and legal risk mitigation, because companies don't even have to wait for regulators to create a sandbox. A lot of the role actually in AI governance, particularly when you have new and novel use cases, is to even negotiate with teams over what good could look like when the risks are less understood, for example, like with agents. And you can absolutely, as small teams, do this yourself internally as a company and have the legal and ethics and data scientists that are in charge of central governance actually have some key risk indicators or KPIs for smaller experiments with the team, and just even capture those lessons learned across the organization. Because if the risks don't materialize because they're mitigated with technical guardrails or whatever happens to be, you can share that across the organization. All of a sudden, you can just prototype much faster.
Yeah, and I mean, the most common application of Copilot, right, is search and retrieval. Using RAG or a custom GPT, and it's so easily done. It's safe. It has no bearing on the customer, right? I mean, it has no regulatory consequences, but the main consequence is that suddenly your personal productivity goes up a lot because you just find stuff quicker and you find good stuff within the documents that you need, right?
Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, go on.
This is a good one. Can AI ever truly be unbiased?
Okay, so first of all, I think we need to start with the fact that AI is modeled after the human brain, right? I mean, artificial neural networks, if you go back to McCulloch and Pitts and the first neuron, the artificial neuron, built or devised in 1943, and of course then that being transformed into neural networks, which then form what we call deep learning now. So in many ways, we should not expect it to be any less biased than humans. And humans, of course, in humans, we know there's 200 biases. And so therefore, the answer is no. They will not ever be fully unbiased. And the trick with all the fairness assessments in AI is not to aim for 100% equality, right, on any given metric that you choose, but to define a threshold, to justify it, and then to assess your model against it. So, good example, the Fair Learn Toolkit gives us a set of good workable metrics, equal opportunity, equalized odds, demographic parity. And of course, we're not looking for 100%, but a good comparison is actually the Equal Employment Opportunities Act in the US, right? The 80% or the 4/5 rule, right? You're not aiming for 100% parity, but you're aiming for an equal opportunity of 80% for the disadvantaged or unprivileged category. And really, debiasing AI is all about finding and justifying the right level and then assessing your model against it. But to that question doesn't mean it's unbiased. It's only biased to the degree that you are aware, you control for it, and it's in line with your ethical principles.
Because I think the key thing here is that it can never truly be unbiased. But I think when people say bias, it just needs to be a little less loose with our language. Because when we're really talking about unfair biases, right?
Yeah,
They even
discrimination. Right?
Discrimination.
That's what we're talking about.
And that's really what we should be talking about, because even you could have slight prejudices, stereotypes, or even preferences, because not all biases are bad. When it comes to the use of AI, again, testing for different fairness metrics, disparate impact assessments, there are technical ways you can do this, but we should also be proportionate and pragmatic in that really avoiding unfair discrimination is what we're talking about.
Yeah, we should be very clear. I mean, the reason we even talk about it is because previously we had subjective decisions, right? One person makes a decision, you get the job, you get into that university, or you don't. And that bias was hidden in that person's head making that decision. But because we aggregate data and we train AI systems on it, we suddenly actually make these past biases visible. So in many ways, I think it's good that we are seeing biases, because now at least they're becoming visible and we have the chance to make less biased decisions about employment, about education. And by bringing it out into the open, we can test, we can set thresholds, and on balance, I think we're much better off. So I'm probably having a much more positive view about biases that become known, because the flip side of it is a lot of that what
Remains hidden.
well, it was hidden, right? It's all hidden in the training data, right?
Even with the use case of AI in criminal justice, where it's been racially biased based on just even postcode data and proxy variables, which are proxy for race and demographic, right?
Yeah.
But I think the devil's advocate that I play is that, one, it's exposing different biases, but a question I often get is, well, if humans are biased and AI is biased, what's the difference? And the key thing for people to take away is that scale of harm can be amplified so much. They mentioned someone maybe being racially biased or makes one bad decision. If you've got a machine doing that for potentially thousands of people at once, the scale of that harm can be amplified so much.
But as a statistician, of course, I say, well, if you give me 1,000 decisions, I can analyze them, right? But individual decisions, you never see.
Great point.
Yeah. All right, let's have the next one. Oh, this is definitely one for the lawyer between us. Could you please elaborate on neuro-rights, including as they relate to social media?
Yeah, neurorights are an interesting one. For people that aren't familiar, we're talking about brain-computer interfaces, like Neuralink and AI companies, where basically it's very Black Mirror-esque, which is what it's based on. If you have a brain implant or even a non-invasive device that sits on your head, they use machine learning to interpret your brain signals and to basically predict what you're thinking, right? So imagine instead of past words, I have past thoughts, that I think about it and the machine does it. Now, as you can imagine, there are some unintended consequences that are pretty easily foreseeable over things like thought policing. And governments around the world have actually, and policymakers have been quite proactive. And Chile actually released a neuroprotection bill, including new human rights called Neurorights, to fill the normative gap that we have in current legislation. So they argue for things like the right to free will, like not having your neural interface be hacked, the right to mental privacy, that if you do have a brain chip, you don't want adverts playing every 5 minutes.
Like in that episode,
exactly like in that episode. And the right to even fair access to mental augmentation, because this is a huge one, that in terms of two-tier societies, if we're entering an age of transhumanism, where certain people get this because they're in certain parts of the world and they actually, it's not even just for medical use, but it's for enhancement, where does that leave people that don't get it in terms of equity of access?
Yeah, and of course, if you think about oversight as a key requirement for AI governance, I mean, we're already worrying about AI, polarizing our social media channels, influencing our elections. We're worrying about emotional recognition and steering our purchasing behavior, right? But of course, with a brain interface, you have a whole different level of control over someone, right?
I mean, that access to neurodata, which is quite rich, I mean, there's a lot of inferences you could make from that. But also, beyond even the social media and thought policing misuse, is also for patients that are using it. Unfortunately, a lot of them have had brain implants or use devices from startups that are less medically regulated. And although some of them might have initial successes of overcoming things like paralysis or certain types of depression, lots of these companies go bankrupt, right? And even when they're bankrupt, they don't know where to get another partner, where to get another supplier or who to turn to. So again, there's even a lock-in with these devices as well that should be noted.
Yeah, well, of course, it requires surgery, right, to remove and to put back in. Yeah. Well, that's Black Mirror for sure.
Yep. So on that positive note, let's end with this question. So how do we govern a technology more powerful than anything we've built before?
Okay, yeah, interesting. So powerful, of course, lies in the eye of the beholder, right? Nuclear technology, harnesses great power at the elementary subatomic level. But no, I mean, what of course is meant by this is probably AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence. And if we're really honest, if we plot the path of AI developments, AI has mastered one human type of intelligence after another, and is now able to pass pretty much all tests like the bar exam, right, the LSATs and the like. And clearly, if you extrapolate this forwards, eventually you would expect it to reach or surpass humans at every possible level, at which point we would have the artificial general intelligence, right? That's what AGI stands for. In my mind, that's slightly different to John von Neumann's singularity, right? Because the singularity describes the point at which technological advancement is so rapid and so far beyond our control that we can no longer keep the lid on the technology, and it will keep evolving without our ability to harness, to control it, keep it at bay. I see that danger coming at some point, and I see three specific dangers. Danger number one is that AI systems start learning without understanding how they learn. And a very simple example we've seen with the two Facebook chatbots that started talking to each other and started developing their own language. Very harmless example in many ways, because of course the human language is very inefficient. And if two computers talk to each other, they can quickly work out there's better and faster ways to talk to each other. And that's all that happened. But of course, at that point, we could no longer understand and see what those computers were talking about. So if we lose that visibility of how AI systems learn, that's a danger. Second danger I see is with agency. So if we provide AI systems with access to critical infrastructure, for example, not just your personal finances, right? Tell an AI agent, book me a flight to the Bahamas. That might, that might book you onto first class and bankrupt you for the rest of the year. But more critically, right? Energy, water, any kind of essential services. That to me is, and that includes, sadly, of course, weaponry. And autonomous weapons, of course, is a whole big ethical problem that we will have to address. And whether we will get to some Geneva Convention on this, I'm not sure. Whether that's been enforceable is yet another matter altogether. But that certainly, the second is that big danger, right, is access to critical resources. And the third one, in my mind, is this ability for an AI system to replicate. So if we are to keep controls on AI systems, it must not be possible for an AI system to create copies of itself, because that, of course, would mean that it's essentially immortal, right? Because then the trained weights simply migrate from one server to another, and the system lives on forever. And why I think this is not science fiction is, of course, the recent study by Anthropic that benchmarked all large language models and actually showed levels of deception, high levels of deception across all of them. Not only the Groks and the DeepSeeks, but in fact,
some slightly more deceptive than others.
Exactly, yeah, no, but in fact, our big standard models, right, from OpenAI and others, were performing worse even. So this is a real danger, and this sort of emergent behavior we haven't really understood yet, and the research is actually ongoing now while these models are already out in production. So that's a big danger as they become essentially the interface and the reasoning part of agents, that we are using them for that. We give them agency, autonomy, without even understanding fully their emergent behavior.
I think that's an interesting point as well, because what I would add is that in terms of how do you govern something more powerful than anything we've built before, it's that I don't think that we should treat this like any other technology we built before as well, because the risk can manifest in so many different ways, because you brought up the AGI and self-replication, but even some things, some harms we're even seeing now are far more subtle, right? That even when you look at influence and persuasion of AI chatbots on people, like someone speaking to an AI saying, do I need to speak to a therapist, or do I have any medical issues? And a sycophantic AI chatbot tells you, nope, you're fine, keep doing what you're doing. Or if you ask even subtly, what should I wear today? and it says, I don't think you should wear this, but I recommend you buy X from this brand here,
Yeah,
which
sure.
I'm also sponsored by. And all these subtle ways that it can influence human behavior. Like, should I do X? Should I do Y? And when you have, for example, future societies growing up with AI companions, your AI best friends, that remember everything about you, we haven't done this before.
Yeah.
So there could be many benefits to this and there could be many drawbacks, but unless we reasonably foresee what the harms could be and really think it through, it's sort of the Wild West.
Yeah, and I mean, adding to that, right? I mean, the other most dangerous things humanity has done, biotech or chemical weapons or nuclear energy. Of course, only very few people or very few countries even, right, are able to achieve that level and to be able to develop those. But AI is available to everyone. All you need is a Copilot license, I guess, a GitHub account, and off you go. And I think that is a real danger, right? Is that we really, having a technology that is ubiquitous in application, it's widely accessible, and therefore, opens up a huge amount of potential, malicious activity, right? And therefore, I think you're probably right. We should treat it differently. All the more reason, to talk about sound AI governance and making sure, that we don't get there. It's not the happiest note to end on, but maybe it's also good to have the warning out there. With that, thank you so much for joining us for this episode on Oxford Tea Talks, and we hope to see you again for the next episodes.